Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. All right, so the Browns have made pretty much all of their major offseason moves, right? Free agency has happened. They've brought in all the big names, or at least the big names that are still contributors that they were going to bring in. Maybe they swing a trade here or there. And then the draft obviously was the other important piece to the offseason as well. But barring them trading for a franchise quarterback out of nowhere, the Browns are pretty set for this year. And I wanted to talk about what that means for expectations and what that means for the Browns' future, or what at least they have done this offseason means about the Browns' future going forward. So at this point, looking at what the Browns have cooked up, this to me has a very different energy than the last three off seasons for the Cleveland Browns, or at least pretty much every offseason since like 2017, right? Where since the Baker Mayfield #1 overall pick, and then even transfers into the Deshaun Watson era, the Browns were aggressively making moves in the pursuit of trying to be a Super Bowl contender within the calendar year, right? Going back to before Kevin Stefanski, the Browns with John Dorsey traded for Odell Beckham. That was obviously a move to capitalize on Baker Mayfield after a good rookie season, to get the most out of him and jumpstart him to being a Super Bowl contending quarterback. He wasn't ready for that at the time. It became a big mess of a deal that ended up blowing up in John Dorsey's face, and ultimately was part of why he got fired in Cleveland, on top of other disasters like hiring Freddie Kitchens. So going back there, the Browns have made big moves. Browns made big moves last year. Browns made big moves the year before when they brought in Deshaun Watson, and then they brought in Amari Cooper before that. All of this stuff screamed towards, hey, this team's trying to be really good right now. They weren't successful. We can all admit that from everybody, right? Whether you put John Dorsey on the pedestal or Andrew Berry on the pedestal, everybody tried to put this team in a championship category with some offseason moves. They weren't successful. That doesn't mean you don't continue to try, but that does mean that this wasn't successful for whatever reason it was, whether it be the quarterback play did not live up to expectations, which was the case for literally every year that they tried to become a Super Bowl contender, whether it be Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, obviously Deshaun, much worse than Baker Mayfield. All of that being said, the energy going into the offseason has always been, since like 2018, or not 2018, since 2019, the offseason of 2019, the Browns are trying to win a championship, or they're trying to be a championship contender. And you can feel that in how aggressively the Browns made moves in that direction. Well, now we sit here today, and the Browns have probably had one of their more low-key off seasons. No big free agent deals, no giant trade for a wide receiver. They brought back Miles on big money, but even with the draft, they didn't, well, up until the last pick, go as high profile as they usually go, even foregoing the option to go with the #2 overall pick to pick Travis Hunter, and opting for the 5th pick, getting Mason Graham with that 5th pick and a future first. So what do all these moves say, right? What does the lack of we trying to win a championship now energy in the offseason mean for the Cleveland Browns? Is this a good or bad thing for this football team? Well, one, I think the thing it says is that this team understands that they are quarterbackless. Now, that is a obvious place to come upon. If you are looking at this from the outside looking in, that's an obvious place to arrive if you have watched this football team last year, that they are a quarterbackless team. And they understand they are a quarterbackless team. The reason that's an important revelation for this football team to have is simple. They are paying Deshaun Watson a lot of money, and the Browns have 175 million reasons still on that contract, or whatever it is left on that deal, to be delusional and hope this thing works with Deshaun. Like, there are some teams out there that, as long as they had that money committed to him, would still be committed to him as a starting quarterback. The Browns have demonstrated this year that they are no longer committed to Deshaun Watson being the starting quarterback on the team. I think they understand that they're going to have to tolerate him on the roster a little bit longer, but they're no longer committed to Deshaun Watson being the starting quarterback on this team. They drafted 2 quarterbacks, they signed a quarterback, and they traded for a quarterback. They have made their minds up. They also traded for an extra first-round pick. I think a huge part of not opting for Travis Hunter there, and we'll see what it turns into, but I think a huge part of not opting for Travis Hunter there is that getting an extra first-round pick gives the Browns an additional resource to help them find a quarterback. Now, they can use that additional resource to draft the quarterback, which we're all assuming that the Jaguars pick is going to be packaged with the Browns pick and turned into a quarterback, or maybe the Jaguars pick outright gets the Brown a quarterback, or the Browns pick outright gets the Browns a quarterback, and then you use the extra first-round pick to add a significant piece immediately around that quarterback and give that quarterback 3 years worth of first-round picks surrounding him immediately on top of all the older veteran talent that you have on the team, which is a good plan if you could guarantee that you get a quarterback. The problem is you can't guarantee that you get a quarterback, and that is the gamble that the Browns are making. Now, that's how we're assuming that resource is going to be used. I would not discount that the Browns could potentially use that resource to grab a player in the league, like Brock Purdy. There's been rumblings about Dak Prescott. I believe that contract is ridiculous to trade for at least another year, so I don't think it'd be Dak. But depending on the type of deal that Brock Purdy gets done, and as of recording this video, and I'm going to double check now just to make sure I'm right, but as of April 30th at midnight, Brock Purdy is still without a contract, and the last report from David Bonilla is that they're not even close. Now, keep in mind that Brock Purdy, if we go to over the contract, or OTC, right? Let's go there and look up Brock Purdy's contract information. He's on the last year of a 4-year deal signed in 2022. So he's at the end of his rookie deal. Usually quarterbacks get extended the year prior, right? So he should have probably been extended in the 2024 offseason. Him going without a contract up until this point is strange. It does demonstrate that there might be cold feet in San Francisco's side. Also, another thing that's added into this is the elbow weirdness with Brock Purdy. I think they're worried about his health. Also, there's been more rumors about Brock Purdy being moved than anybody else. And I think that's because there is a little bit of cold feet. So maybe the Browns make a move at Brock Purdy. The odds are that the 49ers are going to franchise tag him no matter what and try to get a deal if you want Brock Purdy, right? And then you sign Brock Purdy to a bunch of money, and then you trade for him. Now, look, man, that's just one possibility. If you hate that possibility, do not confuse me with somebody who is championing that possibility. I'm just looking at this and saying to myself, this could be possible. Not that I love it. I don't love the idea of trading for another quarterback who is good somewhere else and rewarding them for that money here when the team that he earned that money with did not want to pay him that money. I'm not a big fan of it. I'd rather draft the guy. I'd be like, let me get on the confirmed table on that. I'd rather draft the guy, but that's another option there, right? So I say all of that to say, don't limit how the Browns will use that resource just in drafting a player. They will use that resource in other ways. There's also a chance that the Browns might not love the 2026 class once it gets down to it and sees Brock Purdy as the best way to get a quarterback. It's a lot of different ways this thing can shake out. We don't know enough to be confident at this point about anything about the 2026 class. What we do know is that the Browns are loading up on assets that would seemingly help them get a quarterback some way, somehow, next offseason. So what does that mean about this season? Well, it's going to be an experiment year. I don't think the Browns are outright trying to lose, right? I think people are going to accuse this team of tanking. I don't think they're going to be worse than they were last year. I think this team is a good bet to fall between 6 and 9 wins. I think just not having Deshaun there, bringing down the quarterback room, 1, 2, bringing down the general vibe, will be enough to where this team will look more like the 2022 team than like what happened last year. I think they will be a reasonably competitive team for most of the series, maybe challenge for the 7 seed up until the end, and maybe depending on how the ball bounces, they get the 7 seed or they don't. I wouldn't be shocked if they got 10 wins, but also 6, 7 wins is also a very strong possibility for them. The margin of error in the NFL is so slim. So, I think the 6 to 10 range, but really 6 to 9 feels about fair for this football team. I don't think they're going to be as bad as they were last year, though. I think there's a lot of reason to believe they're not going to be as bad as they were last year. But offensively, they just don't have enough consistency on that unit to be able to dreb up something that would be anything better than 6 to 9 wins on average. Maybe an extra win off luck, but 6 to 9 real wins feels like where they're going to sit, right? Depending on how their schedule plays out, who's good this year, who's not. 6 to 9 wins feels about where they're going to sit. And I think as long as we see good things from Mason Graham, good things from Quincy Junkins, and, maybe a couple of other rookies, we'll be fine with it. I think you could win 6 games, but like if Dillon Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders looks like a starter by the end of the season, then you're calling this season an overwhelming success, right? I believe this season is going to be judged less on the win-loss record, because we all kind of understand at a certain point the Browns' win-loss record could be something that benefits them towards a larger goal if it's not great. And the Browns have demonstrated that if it gets to a certain point, let's say this team starts like 3-7, but it's like a real hard-fought 3-7 with Joe Flacco, but ultimately they're 3-7. They're probably going to spend the rest of the season playing young guys, understanding that you might lose more games, but you might be fine with that because it might put you in a better position to get yourself out the hole, especially if none of the young quarterbacks have demonstrated that they are worthy of more of a future on this football team than what their draft place tells them, which is a late 3rd, early 4th for Dillon Gabriel and a 5th-round pick for Shedeur Sanders. So, that's kind of where my expectations are. I don't think this is a playoff team. I don't think the Browns will be a playoff team this year. I'd be surprised if they were a playoff team. And I think that's the one benefit to not having hopes of being a championship contender this year that you do get is I think you can be in a place where you can allow the Browns to surprise you and to be a surprise, which since trading for Deshaun, I mean, it's almost been like in order to justify this, you had to be good. You had to be really good. So it was real hard to enjoy anything in that era on top of like, it's Deshaun, bro. Like it's everything that comes with them as well. So that made success really hard to enjoy, even the few times that you had it. So it's kind of tough there. No, I know some Browns fans are gonna be furious and outrageous and suggest that everybody be fired when they hear me suggest that this team's probably gonna be under 500, maybe a surprise over 500 team. And I get that reaction, but that's just kind of where this team is. And honestly, if they get to like 7, 8 wins, 9 wins, given everything they're dealing with, $40 million quarterback on injured reserve after having 3 years of straight up disappointment. Last year, he looked like the worst quarterback in the league. You had a tumultuous offseason with Myles Garrett publicly requesting a trade. If you end this season with some hope about some young players in a 500 or above record, that's a massive win for where you're at right now. And that's a lot to build off of. Now, I know some people are going to outright suggest that the Browns tank. I'm against that. I think the Browns should try to win as many games as possible up to a certain point, right? If you are trying to win as many games as possible and you're like a 2-win team after 12 weeks, all right, we know what time it is, right? We know what time the Browns are going to be on. Especially if there's a quarterback that looks like they could be franchise changing. I'm against tanking unless that happens. If we start watching college football on Sundays and on Saturdays and Lenore Sellers or Cade Klubnik looks like Andrew Luck, then you better lose, right? Then you do what you can do. That's the only way I would ever endorse tanking is if it were that kind of a situation. But it's not that kind of a situation, likely not that kind of a situation coming up with these quarterbacks in this next draft class. So I suggest you win as much as possible because winning is good for program development, and program development is good for young player development. Doesn't matter you have all these early picks if you can't develop them, and you can't develop them if you don't win games because you can't build a culture when you're losing. So that's why I think win as many games as possible. Unless special circumstances arrive. Once those special circumstances arrive, or if those special circumstances arrive, we will have that conversation because it's not guaranteed to even come up at all. That all being said, that's where my expectations are. For the first time in it's been a long time. I've been predicting the Browns to be a playoff team for a long time. And a couple years they came through. Most years they didn't. So maybe there's reverse logic. Maybe I reverse jinx the Browns this way. But I don't think they're going to be a playoff team this year. I don't think it's a realistic ask to think that this team's going to make the playoffs this year. Not because they're not talented. It's just they don't have enough consistency on offense to be able to do it as they are constructed. They have giant holes at wide receiver. Their quarterback room is a 40-year-old, Kenny Pickett, and 2 rookies who were close to being day 3 picks. Dylan Gabriel was like 5 picks away from being a day 3 pick. Shedeur Sanders is a day 3 pick. Now, I think Shedeur Sanders is much more talented than your average day 3 pick, but who knows how the Browns see him, want to develop him, and want to use him, right? And even if he does play, right, and he is super talented, rookie quarterbacks are usually going to go through a lot of growing pains in their first couple years starting. So that doesn't guarantee a good win-loss record, even if Shedeur wins out this battle, does prove he could be a starting quarterback. You're still probably going to not be over 500 or close to the 500 window, even in that scenario, even though you'll feel great in that scenario. So that's kind of where I'm at. I want to know where you guys are at. And another part to that question, does not expecting this team this year to be a real playoff team or a championship contender kind of free you up to enjoy them a little bit more? Y'all let me know. Because to me, maybe it's just the burden of Deshaun being lifted off this team. But I just find them to be a lot easier to, root for this year. And maybe it's a number of things there, right? But that's kind of where I'm at. I want to know where you guys are. But y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.